Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Hello, and welcome to the HR Chat Podcast. I'm Pauline James, founder and CEO of Anchor HR and associate editor of the HR Gazette. It's my pleasure to be your host, along with David Krillman, CEO of Krillman Research. We're partnering with the HR Chat Podcast on a series to help HR professionals and leaders navigate AI's impact on organizations, jobs, and people.
In this episode, we speak with Dr. Keith Duggar, CTO of X-Ray and co-host of Machine Learning Street Talk, one of the world's top AI podcasts. Keith brings a unique perspective shaped by his work at Microsoft, on Wall Street, and now at the forefront of AI-powered augmented reality. Dr. Duggar shares how AI is transforming human interaction, what it means to subtitle life, and how organizations can practically and safely leverage generative AI tools. He walks us through helpful mental models, the risks of hallucinations, and why a thoughtful, hands-on approach is key.
Dr. Keith Duggar, we're so pleased to have this time with you today and welcome this conversation to support our community and learning more about AI and how they can leverage it in their day-to-day practices, and also as they look to inform how they scale their approach within their organizations and for themselves personally. Could you take a few minutes to tell us about your background, your current work? I understand that you worked in finance.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to, let's say, extol some of the positive virtues of AI and get people interested and embracing it. So, yeah, I was educated as an engineer, actually as a chemical engineer, but I also minored in computer science. And as like chance would have it, all the work I was getting was for software. Software engineering and applied math and that sort of thing. So I tried out academia for a couple years. I postdoced. Just wasn't really a fit for me. And so after a bit of soul searching, I had a friend who worked in finance and in Wall Street, and he said, "Well, why don't you send your resume to a recruiter?" And he gave me a name. I sent the resume, and a few weeks later, I had a job because there's high demand for that skill set there. So I think I spent about 8 years doing trading, so equity trading, all types of equity and equity derivatives. Did that mainly for market making and high frequency. And so I was one of those evil sort of quant rocket scientists or whatever that got scapegoated for the crash in 2008 and all that. Truth be told, it's not our fault. It's the same old story. The people with all the power are like the big people, right? The banks, the politicians, all that. They needed a scapegoat, so that was us. And at some point, I just realized that I was kind of just moving other people's money around, and every time I moved it, taking a little bit, and I just felt like it wasn't really contributing to any tangible, concrete benefit I could perceive. So I got out of that business and went to Microsoft, actually doing technology strategy. But the cool thing was it was for Microsoft's manufacturing customers. So their largest, manufacturing customers, which really brought me back to my engineering roots. Loved it, had a great time there. But then, and I met Tim there, by the way. So my co-host on Machine Learning Street Talk, we met at Microsoft. And by way of him and meeting his brother, we came up with this idea for X-Ray Glass, which is the startup that I now am the CTO for. It's x-ray.glass if anybody wants to check it out. So we started that up, and I went full time there, and that's where I'm at right now.
And by the way, just X-Ray Glass is an AI company, and what does it do?
Yeah, so and it's XRAI .glass, which we call it, X-ray, but that stands for Extended Reality Artificial Intelligence. And so, the mission started with actually Tim's grandfather, who's 90-something years old and has lost his hearing, but he's cognitively fine. And they really, at Christmas one year, they were seeing what an isolating experience that is, because he doesn't know sign language, he doesn't know how to read lips. And they thought, well, hang on a second, he watches TV all the time with subtitles. Why can't we subtitle life? So that was the original mission: is can we just subtitle life? Can we, through these AR glasses that were just starting to become a thing, can we display in real time subtitles of what people are saying around you in these glasses, so you can hold your head high, you can look at the people you're talking to, you can engage, but just have this augmentation that makes up for the hearing loss. That was the original vision, and it's since expanded significantly, really based on, just demand from customers and companies and enterprises into a lot of other things. But in essence, it's a software that in real time transcribes and translates and applies artificial intelligence to speech to text and text to speech for all kinds of applications.
What an interesting journey. I think it just, as you speak to wanting to really add value with the work that you're doing and how you've been able to do that with the startup. Can you also tell us a bit about the mission of Machine Learning Street Talk?
Yeah, so that was a brainchild of Tim. So when we were at Microsoft, he put together an internal set of paper review calls where folks at Microsoft would get together and go over the latest machine learning and AI papers. And it was really the mission at that time inside Microsoft was let's just explore and learn, what's going on as a team, a small group of people at Microsoft. He was posting those on the YouTube channel. They started to gain traction. Him and I met, early on and just kind of hit it off. We're very complementary to each other intellectually. And so it was a really fun and good fit for us. And the mission of Machine Learning Street Talk really became to explore and talk with people in the field, in the trenches, but in a way that's friendly to a wide audience. So it's a difficult balance. We want to both have technical depth, but try, if we could, to present it in ways that was understandable both to deep technical folks, as well as hobbyists, enthusiasts, business executives, like really anyone. So that's what we try to do. We try to communicate what's happening in AI and machine learning to a broader audience, but with technical depth.
And I want to sort of underline for particularly the HR managers out there, this is a wonderful example of peer learning, of you just get people together and they collectively help drive forward their learning in an area.
Yeah. I mean, so I think my two kind of, let's say, intellectual passions in life are learning and problem solving. And so for me, the partnership with Tim and Machine Learning Street Talk is just, it's been a godsend. It's really transformed my life because it makes it so fun to learn. And I get this privilege, right, of talking with leaders in the field and practitioners in the field and everybody. And it's fun.
Now, the main thing on managers' mind these days are the large language models like ChatGPT. And they need some kind of mental model about, if I'm going to have this tool, what is it likely to be good at? What might it be able to do if I put some effort into fine-tuning the prompts? What's a waste of time because it just cannot do that? Do you have a mental model, or can you talk about the different mental models people have to make sense of what this tool is?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably need a couple of mental models because they are, in a sense, they're very general. So you need to think about them in a couple different ways. The first way to think about them is they are literally language models, and what this means in effect is that they can communicate with you. You can communicate to them using natural language, and so they have a good ability to process and digest and produce well-formed natural language, in a variety of languages. So whereas in, let's say before them, the primary interface to computers would either be, say, a GUI, some graphical interface, or some type of programming language or domain specific language or HTML or all this type of stuff, which you would have to learn as a person because you wouldn't start knowing those. They're not your first language. They're not your natural language. So the first thing is a transformation of the interface. Now, I do want to say up front, let me just, and we'll probably maybe get into more detail about this later, but there are trade-offs, okay? Like anything in life, there's no free lunch. So by communicating in natural language, you lose the precision and the specificity of kind of those machine languages and programming languages. And so it introduces ambiguity and, flexibility and things like that. So there's there are trade-offs, there are pros and cons. But as a first pass, it's this language interface to and from. The second thing is that, almost, I wouldn't say by accident, but in order to learn language, what they do is they train it on pretty much any language that's available, right, in digital form. So this is like the entirety of the internet and any other library sources and things like that. And so kind of for along the way of learning language, they've also ingested just a massive quantity of information from all this language that they've learned. And neural networks just kind of naturally kind of compress and form structures and representations of this knowledge. So there's a sense in which they're kind of a massive repository or compression, if you will, of all the knowledge that they were fed in when they were learning language. And so that allows them to act as really excellent search engines, and not just search engines, but search engines that can, first of all, understand what you're asking in natural language and then produce back, let's say, results and examples and things like that are tailor-made to your question. Because it's like they're sort of ad-libbing and putting together all the pieces, to make it exactly what you asked for. And just an example of how transformative that is, and before LLMs, for example, suppose I wanted to learn about, and I'll use programming just because that's what I do from day to day. But as an example, suppose I wanted to learn about how to, display a dialog box on Android or something like that. What would I do? Well, I'd have to go to a search engine, like say Google, type in some of those keywords, scroll through the results to find an article. Suppose it's a Medium article. I'd go read this Medium article. I'd have to slog through like 4 paragraphs of the person telling me why this is cool and why I would want to do it, which is unnecessary because I've already decided I want to do it. And then eventually slog through more material to finally get to an example that maybe wasn't exactly what I wanted. It was sort of slightly different. And then I'd have to mentally transform that myself. Large language models completely streamline all that into a single query and result. And so they're just order of magnitude more efficient search engines. So I'm going to pause here. There are other mental models, but let's pause on these two and then maybe talk about them a little bit.
The one thing that I would dig in on a bit is the fact that because it's ambiguous, language is going to be ambiguous. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you want, and sometimes people get frustrated because they said, that isn't really what I wanted. And so you have to go down some kind of path of rephrasing the questions. And I've seen people have very long prompts sometimes. Tim maybe being one of them. Yeah, but
Yeah.
What is your thought about how you interact with it when it doesn't give you what you want?
So you just hit the key word there, which is interact. This is an interactive process. You should always start let's call it a dialogue. You should always start a dialogue with an LLM as an interactive process, and keep it simple. You ask a question. You do want to, and there are sort of tricks that you'll learn over time. And I'm hoping one day, there's training on how to do this. But you'll kind of learn tricks of how to phrase things, just like you had to learn how to phrase Google searches to give it a good shot at kind of getting to where you want to go to, like initially. But keep it simple. Keep it concise. You fire off something, it gives you an answer. If it's a bit off or even far off from what you were looking for, then you iterate this process. So just keep going with it. Like say, thanks, but that's not really what I was looking for. I'm really more asking about this, right? And so you do this kind of back and forth with it, and you can, let's say, triangulate, to where you're trying to get to. Like that's the process you should follow initially. Now, like you mentioned, Tim, with his massive prompts. So those come from after you go through this process, you go through this kind of iterative triangulation, you get to where you want to go, you'll learn kind of a prompt that you could have given it at the beginning, almost like, let's say, a composite of all the prompts that got you to where you want to go. You'll have an idea of a prompt that you could have given it to really get directly to this answer. And what you'll want to do if you think you're ever going to use this again is kind of copy those prompts somewhere, clean them up a bit, or even ask the LLM itself to do that for you into a prompt that kind of compiles and digests, that pathway so that you can reuse it again later. And so then if you need to, let's say, start the conversation again, which you sometimes have to do in LLMs, you take that compiled prompt and you put it in there, and then you're starting farther ahead, in the pathway, the journey, if you will, than you would have been otherwise.
By the way, and I really like that idea that, gosh, I'm struggling with these prompts and I want to put them all together. And I think, well, how am I going to do that? Well, I just ask the LLM to, in the early days, people, and you still hear there's people talking about, well, it's just a stochastic parrot, or it's just superpowered autocomplete. Do you want to explain what those mental models are and what you think of those ones?
Sure. So the superpowered, the stochastic parrot, the idea there is that, as we said, it's been trained on this massive corpus kind of all, or most of the available, say, hopefully non-copyrighted, but who knows, material from the web. It's been trained on this huge corpus. And of course, even though these models have hundreds of billions of parameters, right, that's still not enough to store petabytes of information. So what they're doing is kind of finding patterns, compressions, projections. They're really distilling and digesting all that information, and that necessarily is a lossy process. Okay, so they've kind of got this all compressed down, and you can sort of think about the parrot, that part of a parrot, which is, if anybody's had parrots, sure, they can repeat some of what you say, right? But there's some loss there. It's not quite, exactly right. It sounds really close, but they can repeat it, and it's usually parts. It's parts of what you said. It's sub sentences and phrases that they've heard, many times over, like Simon is a pretty bird, right? That kind of stuff, right? Curse words usually show up pretty often in these things. And so that's the process that the LLM, it's digesting that information, it's breaking it up, it's creating compressions and billions of artifacts that it can, little Lego blocks that it can reassemble. And then we get to the second part of the stochastic parrot. So we've got the parroting there, and then the stochastic part is it's got all these pieces, and now it needs to reassemble them, right? But to a degree, that information has been lost. It's been converted into kind of, let's say, networks of probability, right? And so it starts putting out these parts, and it puts out a part, and then it looks at what it's put out so far, and it probabilistically, it sort of flips some dice and some coins. It decides what the next part would be. That's the stochastic, part of it. So this is what people mean when they say it's a stochastic parrot, is that it's digested everything into these parts, and then it rolls some dice and kind of strings together the parts like a parrot would to form a response. Okay, and go ahead.
And I suppose what's good about that is that if you're interested technically what it's doing without getting really into how neural networks design, that gives you a pretty good understanding of what's going on under the hood. And it ensures that you don't think, well, I'm dealing with a human behind the screen here. So it highlights some of the limitations. In general, though, I don't feel it's a particularly useful mental model, because I think it maybe undermines, it makes you think that it's less than it is.
Well, I mean, yes and no. So there certainly are limitations to this process. And I mean, for example, hallucinations is, a well-known problem with large language models. Like, you ask it for a reference, like, hey, LLM, I heard that David wrote a paper recently that was about XYZ, right? Now, even though you've never written a paper about XYZ, it doesn't, in a sense, have that information anymore because it's been compressed and chopped up and stripped away. And so it's going to give you an answer. It'll string together, oh, yes, like, David wrote a paper entitled, transphysical, appropriation of such and such, and it'll string it together, right, and give you something that looks really convincing. It's like, wow, that sounds like a great paper. Heck, you could probably even ask it to generate an abstract for you, and it would seem great. But it's all fantasy. It never existed, because once you've kind of chopped up to the world into this probability space, that space is much larger than the actual world. So I think it's good to know that those are possible limitations. Is that you have to be aware that maybe what you're getting is a stochastic combination of parts and not something that was really there.
Along those lines, would say what hearing understanding is that it's definitely not autocomplete with this, that it's actually making a prediction around what the best response would be, which explains both hallucinations and also, as you mentioned earlier, we can get much more sophisticated in our prompts and how we leverage them, but the exact same prompt in the same system can actually elicit a different response, which can be confusing for individuals as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. So and that was the other mental model, which is some form of autocomplete. Autocomplete on steroids, or whatever the sort of phrase is. And the way in which it differs from, well, I mean, a traditional autocomplete would really only be looking at a very tiny context, first of all, right? It would be looking at the last couple of words that you typed and trying to find the next few words. Okay, the context in these large language models is orders of magnitude larger than that. And it's also much more sophisticated and more complex. It doesn't just look at, say, the last, part of the what came before, or even it doesn't even look uniformly. It can be intelligent about how it kind of looks around in there to find the next matches. And it's just a far more sophisticated and much larger model. So it's not a fair comparison in terms of sophistication. It's a fair comparison at the lowest level, which is that, yes, at the lowest level, this machine with hundreds of billions of parameters is looking at the context, and it's deciding the next part, the next token, if you will, and then it kind of moves forward and moves forward and moves forward, much like an autocomplete would. But that's about the end of the comparison, there. And so you're right that in these very low level kinds of senses, it's correct, but they do distract from, and sometimes are meant to, diminish the capability that's been, added on top, like just the massive amount of capability difference.
Now, if we look at different kinds of AI, people are familiar with, as I say, the large language models, ChatGPTs of the world, but they'll also, they may remember that recommendation engines were the classic example of an AI, as well as more recently something like alpha geometry, which is doing extremely well on difficult geometry questions. So are there different categories of AI that we should be thinking about, that this category is quite different from that category?
Absolutely. I mean, so we kind of, in technical parlance, if you will, we refer to things that are called narrow intelligences. So these are artificial intelligences that are tasked to do something very specific: folding proteins, integrating, performing mathematical integration, recommending videos, etc. And so the advantage of narrow intelligences like that is that when you train them, all your resources, all your parameters, all your computation, all the energy you're using, all the money you're spending, are focused on that one task, right? And so instead of being a jack of all trades but master of none, it's a master of one thing. And large language models are, in a sense, kind of both narrow and general. They're narrow in that, at least, out of the box, the common ones really, up until recently, only understood, text, right? They only understood language. They really couldn't make much useful of, say, audio data or, video data. Now they're starting to. So people are starting to train, what are called multimodal models. This means it has multiple modes of input data that it understands. And then on the other hand, they're general in the sense that you can, because natural language is itself flexible, you can ask all kinds of questions in natural language and pose all sorts of problems, and you might get an answer from the LLM, right? But it turns out that the answers really come from what you can imagine as kind of a Swiss cheese. It's like this block of Swiss cheese. It's taken all the knowledge that was in its training corpus, and it's compressed it and chopped it up, and it can kind of reassemble it, but there's a bunch of holes in there. And so for some questions you ask, you'll get great answers. For some questions you ask, you'll get bad answers. For some, you'll get answers that really seem right, but they're subtly wrong, and sometimes in dangerous ways if you just apply them without domain expertise.
Yeah, and that's, I think, another key lesson for managers when they're educating their employees as well as using it themselves, is this danger of answers that are just wrong in a subtle way. They're very convincing, but you do have to apply domain expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Keith, can I ask if there's any developments in the world of Gen AI that have surprised you or surprised you lately?
Well, honestly, believe it or not, the things that are surprising me lately are some of the geopolitical and social phenomenon happening in the sphere. So, for example, I was just really quite shocked that DeepSeek was as open as they were with their methodologies and techniques and code. I didn't expect that because of the geopolitical tension between the United States and China in particular. I wasn't expecting a Chinese company to be so open, and it just happened again. With these sort of G1 robotics release, open sourcing the models and methods of that, and kudos to them. I mean, this is really amazing, and I think it's good actually for the world. I think that the best path forward for humanity is widespread, distributed, open, diffuse, development by everyone, by all countries, all corporations, all hobbyists, all enthusiasts. So things like that are surprising me in terms of technological developments. So I don't want to act like, I want to say no, but it's not because I don't think AI has achieved great things. Like I say no because I had great expectations for AI, and I didn't mean to say AGI. I've had great expectations for AI. So I think it's, this is kind of expected in the sense that, progress is tremendous and very cool. But otherwise, I think it's not so surprising that we've made it this far, and even that we've made it this quickly.
And now everyone's talking about agents as being the next big thing, where the LLM will take a more active role in actually doing things in the world and controlling your computer just as if you were controlling it. What's your thought about that technology?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit concerned about adding agency, and essentially adding in these control loops, right, where AIs can directly control more and more. And the reason why is because we don't know how to really engineer these things well enough to be reliable enough for all use cases. So for some use cases, sure, like an AI that changes your desktop, background with cool AI generated images composed from all the latest, news feeds and X posts and everything like that. That's fine. Like there's no real chance of harm there. But I worry about hooking up, agentic systems to things that had the potential to do harm. And I just don't think we're at a level of sophistication of AI engineering yet to do that. So I think it's a good goal, but we really, it needs to be pursued with caution and with transparency as well. I mean, I think people should know if an AI is going to start taking control of certain activities, or if the content that they're consuming was generated by AIs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and even if people like to use the travel agent example, where the damage wouldn't be that great, except that you are hoping to go to Australia and you end up in Sydney, Nova Scotia.
Right.
which can happen with humans as well, but nonetheless, to hook it up to actually making financial decisions of any kind, buying things on your behalf, as you say, the engineering may not be there to do it reliably.
Or even, for example, in the travel agent thing, maybe for example, books a sequence of legs, flight legs that take you through a certain airport where you don't have what you need to actually pass through the airport. Like there's a visa requirement that you haven't completed or aren't able to complete, or vaccinations that you do or don't have. I mean, those are the types of kind of very detailed engineering type of things that can slip through in particular LLMs, but other types of AI systems that have a degree of probabilistic, stochastic activity, right?
Just to shift gears, can you share with us how you use Gen AI for yourself within your own work?
Sure, yeah. So in the first place, I use it as a really great search engine. So I still use traditional search engines, but a lot of my, let's say, exploration activities have shifted over to large language models. So I really like being able to, the way I'm using it today is I start with the large language model. I ask it some questions. It gives me some information. I'll usually go and try to verify, like certain things will kind of, maybe smell iffy to me. Like, I'm not sure about that. And I'll paste it into Google and see if I can get that confirmed, by somewhere. Or I'll look at the links if I'm using one of the LLMs that provides, reference materials and try and go confirm things. But so that's one thing, is this exploration and searching. I found it very useful for generating tailored boilerplate code. So if I need, like a function that does something that I just don't feel like writing, like I really don't feel like reading through the docs and digesting them and transforming them into code, I can get that initial prototype from the LLM. Now, it typically takes quite a bit of further work on my part to, make sure it's not got any bugs and kind of that it does what I want it to do, and that it's updated to the latest, interfaces, and to kind of expand it in ways that would have been difficult for me to describe in natural language anyhow. Like it's just easier for me to code it myself. But it saves me a tremendous amount of time in that initial prototype construction. And then I use it for fun too. So I have fun trying to generate images in particular. Is what I've played around with the most. So yeah, things like that.
Thank you. And how much does this set you back? So is financially, what systems do you invest in? What's the financial investment that's required, just to provide a bit of an anchor for ourselves, for our audience?
Yes, that's first of all, I am not the kind of, I don't pay $200+ a month for, XYZ, awesome LLM. Like I don't, the ones that are free and or the lower tier pay as you go type things are fine for me. So I typically, first of all, I do have an OpenAI account. I've had an OpenAI account, for some time, and I probably spend like, maybe $20 a month or less kind of on the activities that I do there. I use Gemini, which is in various forms free, right? I use Chat GPT. Even though I have an OpenAI account, I sometimes use like the free version of it or log in. I haven't played around much with DeepSeek. I just didn't really feel the need because I was getting what I needed for my work, at least from the other ones. I play around with it when we do sort of puzzles and problems and things like that to compare, and Grok so as well. So, but primarily I would say I use Gemini and OpenAI.
And if we look ahead 2 or 3 years, how will the capability of AI likely be different from today? So sort of end of 2026 or into 2027?
Well, it's really hard to predict the future, but what I think will start to happen is that we'll have more and more, let's say, more narrow intelligences trained and fit for purpose, and so people should be using a variety of narrowly intelligent, systems for different purposes, and then kind of integrating together the results. And I hope that people start providing kind of advanced user experiences to make that easier. To kind of have like, let's suppose you put in a query that contains some natural language and some equations and maybe some images to analyze. I would love to see, rather than trying to build these massive monolithic God models, I would rather see a model that kind of chunks those up into their different modes and sends different combinations of those modalities to narrow intelligences, pulls the information back and kind of reassembles it. Because we're already seeing that people are finding results, and this is no surprise. I mean, shouldn't have been a surprise, but maybe it's a surprise to some people, that it's better to have a smaller model narrowly trained on your goal than to use a massive generalist model, right? So I think that's where we're going to head towards, is more, let's say, constellations and systems of narrow intelligences rather than ever bigger general models.
Thank you. And your thoughts on the capability of robots and where that's headed?
Yeah, so that's one thing that surprised me. Was because you asked what surprised me. So what's surprising me is how much advancement and resources and focus are going into humanoid robots. So I always figured, we're going to create drones and that's going to be it. Like, people are just going to make more and more drones of all different kinds, things that don't resemble humans at all, whether it's, quadcopters or things on wheels or things on, 4 legs that have wheels, or all kinds of crazy stuff. But there's been really significant advancement in humanoid robots. And, I was a bit confused by that until I had a chat, with a friend of mine, and she helped me see like kind of the obvious, which is, hey, the world is already designed around the humanoid form. So it makes total sense that you would have humanoid robots, because they can fit into that environment. And especially if robots are interacting with people or helping people do the tasks that people would ordinarily do. So I've been really quite surprised at the growing advancement and investment put into robots. And it's super exciting. They're amazing. I mean, I've seen just absolutely amazing videos. Maybe other people have seen those too online. And this gets back to the agentic question, which is we need to be a bit cautious here. Like, even forgetting about AGI, SAGI, doom scenarios, when you start unleashing robots, they can just cause damage, like, accidentally. I do want this to proceed with caution, but it's super exciting.
You've worked in big organizations with that. Do you have advice for organizations that are wanting to respond to AI opportunities, to address the risks?
Well, there's 2 parts to that question: the opportunities and the risks. For the opportunities, I would really encourage, what I would do is I would encourage organizations to hold hackathons and workshops to give people hands-on experience with these. I mean, of course, the software providers like Microsoft and whatnot are incorporating AI, both narrow AI as well as, let's say, LLM technology into their products. But just getting it into the hands of people and letting them try it out in sort of coach sessions, right? Where somebody who's good at these things is kind of walking them through what they can be used for, tailored for their daily experience, I think is what I would highly encourage. Because I've run into a number of people who they just haven't tried it, either because they weren't quite sure how to use it, or they really hadn't imagined the possibilities. And when I walk them through it, and kind of even just a couple hours, they're like, wow, this is going to make elements of my job so much more efficient. So I would encourage that. As far as the risk mitigations go, and this is something I care a lot about, by the way, which is I think the way in which we mitigate the catastrophes that people are worried about is that we think now very detailed and thorough ways about reducing harm, that's caused by AI. Like, AI is already causing harm today. We already know that. Like, we've seen the stories of the harm that, algorithms and whatnot inflict through social media and many other avenues, right? So if we focus on reducing the harms, so for an organization, what's a big harm? Well, data privacy, data leakage, that's one angle. So making sure that you've really got experts in privacy and data isolation and creating, data firewalls and making sure that any AI systems you're using internally are governed, correctly and robustly, right? And then on the output side as well, making sure that you have in place necessary human curation, oversight, surveillance. And I don't mean surveillance in like a negative way, but just keeping an eye on the content, that's being produced, to keep an eye out for, concerning, like misinformation or hallucinations or things like that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the thoughtful insight and discussion today. This has been a shorter discussion. I think David and I could talk to you for the rest of the day and keep learning. For those who are interested in learning more about your work, how should they follow you?
So I am on Twitter. You can find me there. It's Dr. Duggar on Twitter, but I'm not that active. I'm sorry, X. I'm not that active on X yet. I'm becoming more active, and you're mostly going to find a couple posts and some poems and whatnot. But I think, but I will be more active there in the future. So you could do that. Could do that if you wanted to. You could also join our Machine Learning Street Talk Discord channel. So and check out our podcast and YouTube there. I'm pretty active in that Discord community. So if you join the MLST Discord, hang out in there. I'm around. We can chat in there. Otherwise, and then you can check out my company. So that's xrai.glass, GLASS. Check it out. See what we're up to. Try the software. It's in the Android store and the Apple store. Those would probably be the best options right now.
Very good. Are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Let me just check here. I think it's Dr. Keith Duggar, DrKeithduggar at LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.